All right, a couple minutes late. Was at a church potluck and there were way too many good desserts. So here we are, and it's Sunday evening, the second round of Sunday night school. And tonight I wanted to try something special, which is a look into the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 22. This has been a passage I've wanted to unpack for quite some time, and I thought, well, why not do it with a Sunday night school and give anybody who wants to a chance to join in, offer questions, comments, maybe add some interesting perspectives on the way. So if that's you and you're curious to be part of the conversation, feel free to post a comment in the YouTube live chat. I'll be able to pick that up on my end. And when I see that, will give me some interesting directions to go. Let me just double check and make sure there's nobody asking for the link here. Literally just catching up on social media. And so, yeah, if you found this through one of my stories, I'm super excited that you're here. If you follow me on my YouTube channel and got a notification of a live, so excited that you decided to drop in. This is a casual Bible study. I don't have a outcome that we're going to get to, and we may not stay in Deuteronomy chapter 22 the whole time. But that will be the starting point because I've wanted to study this passage for a while. So let me pull my screen up here and get a screen share ready. I'm going to be starting in the Blue Letter Bible. This is an incredible online resource, which I recommend pretty much every time I come on. And let's see, present screen. We may spend a little bit of time over in Logos as well. That is a Bible software that gives you free access to it. It has some interesting, I guess, word study tools. Like you can see where there are distributions of words, like we might look at the word adultery today. I was doing some study earlier this morning and ran into that question. And as I was browsing, I came across Deuteronomy chapter 22. And so I think this is the reason why I constantly have wanted to study this and why I'm so excited to pull it up tonight. Deuteronomy 22. So until I get some feedback, I will continue just kind of on my own in a sort of exploratory process. But I will also invite you into some of the ideas and insights that I'm already aware of with this passage. Let's see, I think I like this size, filling the screen. Deuteronomy is a very interesting book. Let's actually go back to the beginning, to Deuteronomy. So near the beginning, we have chapter 6. And if you take a look at verse 1, this passage is written to the people of Israel about the life that they are called to lead once they get into the promised land. These are the commandments, statutes, and judgments. Now, it's an interesting thing to go into all of these different things because throughout the Old Testament, you get reference to commandments, statutes, precepts, judgments, and then you have the name of the writings of Moses, the Torah. So there's all these words for things that a lot of us will come in and say, well, this means rules or laws. And when we look at laws from our perspective as 21st century Americans, for me, it's very different than what they were looking at back in their day. From some Bible teachers, I've learned that Deuteronomy is actually the form of a covenant. It's called a suzerain covenant. And you get some fascinating things about this once you get into the days of Jesus. One of my Bible scholar friends has just posted on Substack about this. And if you're curious to learn more about what this sort of covenant means and how it applies to us today, I can definitely recommend you to that. Just drop a comment or send me a message and I will share that resource. But the covenant meant that there was a powerful king. In this case, it's God, the Lord your God. And then you have the vassal king. And often this covenant was made in the form of a marriage between the king and the princess, kind of a fairy tale style. But what this covenant involved was that the smaller state would make all of these promises about things that they would and would not do in their relationship to the larger state. Very interesting that what the people of Israel are called to do is this. We all know about the lists of laws and the rules and the things that make you clean and unclean and pure and impure. The book of Leviticus is full of that. The book of Deuteronomy, the last time I went through this book, I was very impressed by how much the emphasis was on the relationship that God had with his people. And you get this even here in the Great Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, is one Lord. This is why a lot of Hebrew people have trouble with the Christian Trinitarian concept. God is one. And thou shalt love the Lord, we must be in King James, the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And all of these words will be in your heart. This is why we have all of these other chapters. We don't just have love God, we have all of these teachings that are going to be they're going to be a sign, they're going to be instruction. This is what is captured in the word Torah, that this is a way of coming to understand something about the nature of the relationship the people had with God. This is the purpose of the law. Now, in my book, I have a whole section on this, and I'm just creating the audiobook, and I was recording and editing last night. So this is fresh for me. But it's the background that we need to understand. When we get to Deuteronomy chapter 22, we're in the middle of a covenant. And let's start at verse 20 and work our way up. Laws about war. All right. Very interesting. There's a thing about trees in here which is fascinating. Yeah, only the trees which are not trees. Let's change to the ESV. This will be easier. The way that language evolves over time is just, that's another interesting thing. When you're making war against a city, you shall not destroy its trees. These laws get pretty detailed, right? The trees that are not for food can be used to build siege works against the city. Like, heck, who knew that there was warfare strategy in the book of Deuteronomy? But here it is. 21, unsolved murders. All right. This is where we start to get close to our topic of conversation for today. When you go to war and you capture a beautiful woman, I'm like, this is not where most Bible studies begin, I suppose. Desire to take her to be your wife. It doesn't say whether or not this person already has a wife, because it didn't really matter. A man was allowed to have as many wives as he wanted. And what you had to do, you had to bring her to your house, shave her head, pare her nails, take off the clothes in which she was captured, and lament her father and her mother a full month. After that, we have this euphemistic language of going into her. And we all probably understand what this means. After that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. Doesn't say that you have to go through a marriage ceremony or anything. And it's also another interesting thing to think about is that this is a husband-wife relationship. And I'm curious. I've been thinking about this for a while, so forgive the sidetrack. But I've been curious what this word husband actually means. Oh my goodness. Do you recognize this word, Baal? This was the name of one of the gods in ancient Mesopotamia. This was the god of thunder. Primitive root. And this is translated as marry, husband, dominion, wife, married wife. What does it mean? It means to marry, to rule over, to possess, or to own. So there is a connection between owning this person and having sex with them, at least in this scripture passage. To be a master, to marry, have dominion, be husband. This doesn't possess the, like in English, husbandry is a particular thing. Interesting. Husbandry is a particular thing, and we can make this connection in the English language between a shepherd and a husband, or a farmer and a husband. Husbandry is the art. Let's just look at a dictionary quick. Dictionary husbandry. Let's see what this comes up with. This has a particular meaning. This means care, cultivation, and breeding. Management, conservation of resources. Yeah. Somebody else has asked this question. See, this is why when we read the Bible in English, we can sometimes miss what the text is talking about. Because let's go back to our verse here. After that, you may go into her. You may go in, and let's see if this recognizes that euphemism. This is used in multiple places, but it, okay. We'll have euphemistically, but this is also the same language used to like go into a house. So going into her, into the woman. Oh, very interesting. Okay. This is how my Bible studies go, by the way. So if you have a question or want to take us any different direction, feel free to pop in, leave an observation. But okay, you may go into her and be her Baal. This doesn't have to do with cultivation and care and stewardship. This has to do with ownership. And so what is really like this is where I love seeing the Mosaic Law in context. We'll close this out. This is about marrying female captives. When people went to war in that day and they saw a beautiful woman, they didn't take her home, have her go through a mourning process for the people who had died for a month. That's not how it worked. And so when you get the addition of this kind of rule in Deuteronomy 21, you have a version of warfare that is more humane, especially to the female survivors. It's a step, I would say, in the right direction. But we don't understand this if we're just looking at this as, this is just everyday life. This is not everyday life context. And that's why it's important to go in and study words like this. And so you get to this idea of you shall be a husband and she shall be your wife. And most likely this word for wife is the same as the word for woman. It's fairly ubiquitous everywhere that we go. There was just a singular word, which she shall be your female, basically. Sometimes the word is translated wife. Sometimes the word is translated as just straight up woman. Your wife. Let's see what it says. Yeah, you can see here the distribution of translations of 425 times versus 324. Also used to refer to female animals. Interesting. The word is isha. That's very interesting. And well, let's see. It's gonna show this word in the very beginning of Genesis. When the man said, "This is me," he recognizes part of himself in the woman that is brought to him and says, "She shall be called Isha because she was taken out of Ish," which those are the Hebrew words for this, and just the relationship between those two is very fascinating. But woman is also used for the word wife. It's almost like in that day, you couldn't be a woman unless you were a wife. And we'll see in Deuteronomy 22 the other thing that you could be if you were born as a female and not as a male. And at this potluck that I was just coming from, I had a fascinating chat with a former minister, and we were talking about how in the days of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, women did not have rights or agency. The word used for the partner, the male partner, was Baal or Lord or God or owner. So if a man has two women, very interesting. All right. So again, when we're approaching the text, we need to understand that there were a lot of instances where a man had more than one wife. And it looks as though he has loved one and not loved another. And now you have an issue of inheritance transfer because money likes to follow love. But in this case, the firstborn child, no matter whose it is. See, this is, I'm so glad we started in this chapter because 21 gives us an insight into how this patriarchal society functioned and how they thought about this. He shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. Why? Now let's remember, there's a book called Sex and History, which I will highly recommend, by the way. It's a fascinating read, very easy to read, and gives us an understanding of how people understood sex in various cultures throughout history. They have supposed that at this time, they didn't necessarily know how babies were made. Right? Sperm is microscopic. Until we had microscopes, we probably didn't know that this was where a baby came from. But there was some knowledge of this. And in the biblical text, you get Eve, when she conceives and has a son, she says, well, the Lord has given me a child. She doesn't say, well, this is Adam's child. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have conceived a child. Adam's probably like, I don't know, did I have anything to do with it? Maybe he was aware, maybe he wasn't. That's an interesting question. But in this case, the most important thing was that the son came from the man. The right of the firstborn is his. So even if you didn't love the woman who had the child, the first child that you had would always receive double in terms of inheritance. And so when we talk about ideas of firstborn, son, and then also of virgin, daughter, we are talking about financial value and property transfer, possessions, when he assigns his possessions. If we remember, I wonder what this word has. If this is referring to possessing, haya, haya, was come to pass. Okay, this is more of a casual passive thing. I wonder if it was common for them to have more than two, or if two was kind of like the max that they would have. And then again, my curiosity will go to this place. This kind of a wife, this kind of a wife, if you didn't like her, so you take this woman captive, you have sex with her, and you don't like it, you can let her go where she wants. Suddenly, she's no longer your captive. You're just not allowed to sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave. And this phrase, since you have humiliated her. When I read this last time, I thought the humiliation had to do with having her shave off all of her hair. Um, which this is an interesting implication that the body has memory. But this here, let's see what this phrase is. And I think we're going to see this. I noticed it when I passed through chapter 22 earlier. You have humbled her. Anah. With the idea of looking down on or browbeating. It's like ashamed, afflicted, humbled. To be occupied with, to be oppressed. Interesting that it works this way. This word afflicted, let's just see where it comes into play. When Sarai afflicted Hagar. Okay. If you oppress my daughters or take wives besides them. That was Laban saying this to Jacob, he was the guy who had 2 wives, and technically he had 4 if you count the slaves of his wives to be his wives also. This one, he seized her, lay with her, and humiliated her. There is a connection between having sex with a girl who isn't betrothed and humiliating her. But this word is used in the form of oppression, affliction. And so I'm wondering if there's like a particular kind of approach to this. The Egyptians treated us harshly and humiliated us. Philistines wanted to humble Samson. Okay, where's our 22? Yeah. The man, because he violated. I wonder if this is the word humiliated. Because he has violated. This is a case of rape, actually. And the word is violate, and I want to see if it's the same thing as humiliate. Because he has anah, humiliated. To humiliate, to look down on, to afflict, to oppress. Because he has oppressed her. In my mind, it makes sense that we're using the term oppression in both of these contexts. Excuse me. The first one, because you have taken someone captive in order to be your wife, and then you get rid of her. You cannot sell her for money. You can just let her go. So is the humiliation about the going into, or is it about the capturing, or is it something else? We'll dig into that in chapter 22 a little bit more. Now we have this voice of the rebellious son. Any of you who grew up in the Bill Gothard IBLP, shiny, happy people context like me might have potentially had this pulled out on you once upon a time. Don't know if your parents ever said, if we lived back in the days of Moses, you would have been stoned for this. All right, great. I think I think the word is midrash, which is the Hebrew scholarship and teaching on this passage. I think this happened once. Total of once. But the teaching was there. Basically, how I've heard this passage interpreted is that this kind of behavior has this level of significance. They call this evil from your midst. The stubborn, rebellious, glutton, and the drunkard. All right. So we have a pretty strong condemnation of misusing food and alcohol and misusing the privilege of being a child. We won't go too much into it. Only this is our context. Before we started here because this is all a lead up to chapter 22. If a man has committed a crime punishable by death and he's put to death and you hang him on a tree, this is where you get the hanged man is cursed by God. And then another interesting thing: you shall not defile your land. Did you know it is possible to defile, to pollute a land? Now, when I use the word pollute, most of us understand this. But the law has all of these teachings about the land and how human behavior impacts the land. Remember, we started this, was it back in chapter 6? Or was it here? Maybe it was chapter 20. Laws about war. Don't go chop down all the fruit trees. No scorched earth policy for the people of God. Why? You remember again the commission given to Adam at the very beginning to tend and to keep the garden, to be a husband. Yeah. It's very interesting, and we'll have to go in and explore the word and how it's used at the beginning versus here in the law, because this word baal is fascinating. Various laws. Take the animals back to the person they belong to. Like, this is very specific. Most people that I know, they just come in and jump straight to Deuteronomy 22, 22:13, laws concerning sexual immorality. And it frustrates me when Bible scholars will just kind of breeze across all of this. If you come across a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself. Why? That it may go well with you and that you may live long. This is the same. This is the same suffix, like the attachment at the end, the promise, the benefit of honoring your parents, which we saw a person could be stoned for if they didn't do. Also, this one. Some of us have probably heard this in conversation. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination. That word abomination means disgusting to the Lord your God. So if we just look at this and we're like, well, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, this is what people looked at when I was growing up and said that women are not allowed to wear pants because pants belong to men. Now, this was entirely a cultural thing. Back in these days, everybody was wearing robes. What was specific to men, and if you'd like to do a more in-depth look at this, one of the Bible scholars who I follow online has unpacked this. And let's see, I want to see if I can just point out one or two things that they found. A man's clothing, this word, let's see what it means, kali. You shall not wear a man's, look, this never means clothing. A man's vessel, instrument, weapon, jewel, armor bearer, stuff, things, armor, bag, article. You shall not wear men's stuff. If we actually look at the meaning of this verse, it doesn't have to do with the garments. This has to do with the warfare apparatus. And that's what this study was all about. So women were not allowed to put on warfare apparatus of men. A man shall not put on a woman's simla. Look, it's a different word. Kali and simla. Right? If we read it in English, it looks like it's saying the same thing in both places, but it's not. This one means raiment, clothes, garment, apparel. So women had something that they wore, a dress, a mantle. Where else does this come into play? A garment. So garments that belong to women shall not be worn. Why? And I wonder if this had something to do with menstrual blood, because that was considered to be an abomination. Now, I don't know how many women have been concerned lately about putting on, let's just say, a tool belt or something else that only men wear. Who can say? Like a uniform, right? It used to be that a uniform, like a military uniform, was only for a man, right? And so if we come back and look at this text, people can make the argument that it is an abomination to God for a woman to be a soldier, to dress as a soldier. That's what this passage is literally saying. And today, I think most of us have worked through this, and we've recognized that women can make very good soldiers. But it's astonishing to me how people can come into this passage and we'll skip over all of this, and then we come down, oh, look at this. You shall not sow with two kinds of seeds. But the Native Americans sowed with three kinds of seeds. You know, corn, beans, and squash. They go really well together. But not this. Cloth of wool and linen. How can we dismiss the first part of this passage and somehow take on the second part of this passage and say, oh, this doesn't apply to us anymore? I don't have tassels on the four corners of my garments. This was a law. Are we going to follow the law or no? And this is where I'm going to wrap us back around to where we started, which is, what is the purpose of the law? It is to teach us something about the nature of the relationship between the people of Israel and God that are in this covenant written down here in the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is structured like a covenantal treaty. It's ratified using the same actions, blessings, curses, sacrifices. All of these things would have made clear to a person of that day what was going on, what kind of a book this is. This book is a record of a covenant. These are things that the stronger king is telling to the weaker kingdom that is coming under his protection. You shall do these things, and in return for doing these things, I will protect you. That's basically what this book is saying. And it says all of these things. There wasn't, I need to probably study this more, but the division of the Mosaic law into the moral, civil, and ceremonial, it seems like it's a really artificial workaround to what's going on here. Because we can't say that this section is not about morality, or this, the treatment of the birds in the nest, is not about morality. We can get rid of that today. We have something to learn from all of these laws. What we have to learn from them is not necessarily what to do next time we see a bird with a nest on the ground. This doesn't happen very often, but we need to learn something from this teaching. That's why you had the Levites. This was the job of the Levites, was to teach people what is it you can learn about who God is and how he is in relationship with us by studying the law. This wasn't you need to remember, and if you for some reason forgot verses 6 and 7 and you took the mother and the eggs, you're going to die because you broke one of God's laws. This wasn't what's going on here. This wasn't you have to memorize all 1,000 things that you do and don't do and be sure not to mess up. That would be an incredibly stressful life. The law was meant to reveal something about God. When Jesus comes and he's like, I fulfill the law, if the purpose of the law is to reveal God, he lives as God among humanity. That is the fulfillment of the law. So here we get to the part that really inspired today's study. And look, we're 36 minutes in, and now we are just getting to the section that we wanted to talk about, which is the laws concerning sexual immorality. And oh, how I wish that phrase wasn't here, because it reminds me, if you haven't watched my video on porneia, which is the Greek word for sexual immorality, you should go watch it. It will help you understand some of what's coming next and hopefully clarify some of, well, I'll just say it's 15 minutes. It's worth a watch because it helps you to understand what the Bible means by sexual immorality, which is very different than what most people who talk about the Bible mean when they say sexual immorality. So, verse 13, if any man takes a woman and goes into her, remember, we had the same thing happening in 21. Goes into her means they're having sex, and hates her. Wow. So, they have sex, and then he hates her. And we have an example of this happening later on. I think it's in the book of 1 Kings, the story of Amnon, who was one of David's children. He was in love with his stepsister. And after they had sex, he hated her. So this was what they're talking about. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but the erotic tension between two people can help them completely overlook the fact that they hate each other. Then once they've had sex, the erotic tension is gone and they're like, I did what with you? So if a man takes a woman and has sex with her and then hates her, I'm reading this without using the word wife. Because once we translate this as wife, we mean something quite different. And it's very interesting that the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out evidence of her virginity to the elder. So he hates her and accuses her of misconduct. I wonder what this word is. And brings a bad name upon her, saying, charges her with shameful deeds. Shameful, alila, doings, works, deeds, actions. The sense of affecting by implication and opportunity. So probably saying that she cheated on him, publicly defames her. Wow. This is very interesting. Wantonness, deeds, practices, evil deeds. This seems like a word that needs to be studied more because this word is attached to shameful and not to deeds. So why is it that we in English get this word shameful deeds? The implication altogether does seem to be that there was no evidence of virginity. What this implies was that when he had bought her, taken a wife, he bought her from her father, and if he expected she was a virgin, he would have had to pay, I think, anywhere between 2 and 4 times what he would have had to pay if she wasn't. And so daughters who could be sold for that much money were in high demand, I suppose, by parents. They're like, absolutely, we want you to have evidence of your virginity when you get sold because then we get way more money. Now, if you sell someone saying that they had their virginity, but they didn't, now the parents are in trouble and the woman is in trouble. And this accusation of misconduct and slander is happening. These guys, the parents, the family need to bring out evidence of the virginity to the elders. What does this mean? They shall take and bring out the girl's virginity. This doesn't even say the evidence. What an interesting verse. I would love to see some more comments on this. I wonder if there is. What is this telling me? Bethulim, virginity made. And this one is a masculine plural. Fascinating. By implication, the tokens of it. I need to study this a little bit more. Because this idea of tokens of virginity, there are some examples of this in that there would be a sheet at this point of consummation. When the man goes into her the first time, they would have this special bed sheet that needed to be stained with blood as proof that the girl was a virgin. If there was no blood, there was no evidence. Now, if you understand anything from a medical, biological standpoint, there should not be blood during sex unless there's menstruation happening. Blood during sex means that something is going wrong. But if they're taking this as evidence of virginity, I'm pretty sure that women would go into this scenario prepared to stain a bedsheet somehow, especially if this was the evidence of their virginity, and that if they didn't have it, see, look, they shall spread the cloak. So most likely this is referring to that sheet that needed to be stained with blood. And the parents would keep that sheet just in case at some point the guy who had bought her said, well, she wasn't actually a virgin, even though I paid and her parents lied to me and I lost money. This was an issue. And this was why the parents would keep that cloak, because when he came out and said, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find in her evidence of virginity. I don't know. I don't know if this is a logical puzzle to anybody else's head besides me, but you should find the virginity the first time you come near. So how is there evidence of that virginity, that first, like after that point? How do the parents already have the cloak when he's not finding it, right? It seems like there's something that we're missing in terms of understanding this tradition. Let me see if there are any commentaries on this, verse by verse. So in 22, here's what they say. You would take a cloth and hand it back to your parents, proving that you were a virgin. That was the token. So this commentator knows what I know. Let's see. Famous one here, 22. To get rid of his wife, slanders her as not having the virginity she pretended to when he married her. Okay. So in order to get the dowry back, that's why he would accuse her of not being a virgin. Because he's like, I paid the virgin price and she wasn't. I've been cheated out of money. I need to get it back. He would have been able to make a legal case to get back the money he had paid for her. Wow, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. This is the thing that makes me a little bit angry, though. If the woman that was married was not found to be one, she was to be stoned to death at her father's door. If, right? Yeah, this is another interesting thing. So the man, he would have to pay a fine if he falsely accused her of this, and it was discovered that the parents had evidence. If she was not a virgin and if the parents didn't have evidence and the guy did this, the girl was probably going to die. So this evidence was really important for the life of the woman to be able to continue. Some think that her uncleanness was punished with death only in case it was committed after she was betrothed. And this author, I actually appreciate the recognition of this commentator of the age that people were married was usually even before the age of sexual maturity in that culture. And so, we're not talking about 25-year-old women who have not had sex. We're talking about 12-year-old girls who have not had sex at this point. And so I guess again, when we're talking about blood in some kind of sexual consummation, it almost would make sense, especially if her body wasn't yet sexually mature, which was a clear possibility being married at such a young age. Yeah. So again, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to pop into the comments here. It's very interesting, and the contrast between what happens to the man if he lies and says she wasn't a virgin, and the parents have the blood on the piece of cloth. Then the elders of the city will whip the man, and shall find him a bunch of silver and give them to who? Not to the woman, the father of the young woman. And this makes sense again if we understand the previous chapter, how women were property of men. You're either property of your father, who he will eventually sell you for money, or you're property of your husband, who has bought you to have kids for him. Now, this happens if he falsely accuses her, and she shall be his wife. He may not divorce her all his days. So this is a bit of a risky thing for someone to do, but I suspect the context was you had a lot of men in that day who were marrying women, and then after they were married, they were like, I want to get some of my money back. So they're like, the product was broken, the product was damaged, the product was not a virgin. And they could then take the parent, the father who now had all that money, to court and say, you cheated me. I want at least half of my money back. And it would also be an opportunity, if he didn't like the girl, for him to get rid of the woman at the same time. So he gets rid of the woman, he gets his money back. But the Mosaic law now makes this more risky for the man. Previously, there was no risk for the man in doing this to the woman. So this is the second time now, and we'll see this everywhere in the books of Moses, that for the first time, maybe in history, you can read the codes of Hammurabi, which were written around the same time. The codes of Moses have so many protections for women. All these sexual laws are about protecting the rights of women, who without them would not have any more rights than the cattle that the person had bought. Now there is a process to go through. The parents can keep this evidence, they can present it. That is now the basis for what happens. But what is more interesting to a lot of people in conversation is that if evidence of virginity was not found in the young woman, they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones. The men will stone the women because she has done an outrageous thing in Israel by whoring in her father's house. And let's look into this word. You shall purge the evil from your midst. First one, in her father's house. This may be why, I don't know if you remember the story of Mary in the book of Luke. When she is impregnated by God, she leaves town because she is betrothed. She's supposed to be married. And this is the time period. If there was a time period when the girl was not allowed to have sex with anybody besides her future husband, it was after she had been sold. At that point, she was supposed to stay home in her father's house, preparing to belong to the new man. Mary leaves and goes to visit her relatives at that point, probably because she was scared Joseph was going to do something like this. Like he was going to say, this woman is pregnant. I paid for, remember, she was called a virgin. He paid for a virgin. He expected to get a virgin. And because she was betrothed, she was legally, according to the Mosaic law, not allowed to have sex with anyone else. So in this case, we have God breaking the sex laws and impregnating a girl who belongs to another man. I suppose that sounds sacrilegious to some people. This is what happened. God, in the birth of Jesus, violated the law of Moses. Mary, because she was betrothed, was not supposed to have a child from anyone else. She was only ever supposed to have the child of Joseph. God comes along and she says, "Let it be to me as you have said." And we think of this as some sacred, holy thing. And if you think of it from the Mosaic law and from Joseph's standpoint, he could have done this. Mary should have been stoned at her father's doorstep when they found out she was pregnant with a child that did not belong to the man she was married to. So, this Bible, like, right? It's so fascinating. How does all this stuff fit together? Committed an act of folly by playing the harlot. Folly, nabala. Senselessness, disgrace. Playing the harlot. Zana. Zana. Harlot, whoring, whoredom. To commit fornication. Which in English, this means having sex with somebody you're not supposed to. It's very interesting how there's a number of different meanings, and this one will come into play in a few other places. In her father's house. This is the issue, is that women did not have agency. There were no 20-year-old women living on their own. There were virgins in their father's house or wives in their husband's house. There was no woman's house. Women did not have their own houses. Women did not have their own agency in this culture. And this is the context we're looking at here. So, example A. We've gone through it. Crazy example, giving some rights to women, so now she can't just be accused. They have this system of evidence, and either the parents have it or they don't. She gets stoned if she wasn't a virgin and she had said that she was. See, this is a very specific example. This is not all marriages. Some men would take a wife who were not virgins. They wouldn't come and make this accusation. They never expected that to be the case. But if she was sold as a virgin, and this would happen more often than not because it's very profitable to get 2 to 4 times your amount of money. And so fathers would likely try to make sure that they had a virgin daughter to sell. Then the elders of the city shall take the man and whip him. If the thing is true, they shall stone her. Again, in context, this is an improvement. There is still vast inequality here. 22:22. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, adultery, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. This is fairly clear. This is connected with the thou shalt not commit adultery commandment. If a woman belonged to another man and you had sex with her, you were robbing the other man of his property. You would die, and if she didn't fight it, she would die. That's so interesting. This word lying with is one that I've also been kind of looking into a little bit, because remember the phrase we had previously was go into, and we're like, this means sex. To lie with, the man who lay with, sakab, lay, to lie, to sleep, to lie down, to rest. This doesn't have the same implications of sexual activity as to go into. To lie with, it may imply sexual relationships, but it very much just implies it. This could be a sort of erotic lying with, or I'm also kind of toying with the idea of that it means sharing a bed with. There's something about an energetic connection, like the energy that a space absorbs. And so to lay with, to sleep in a bed with somebody is a very intimate activity. Energetically speaking, sleep is vulnerable. And so lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. Sleeping together. Maybe they're both asleep. Who can say? But the problem with this wasn't that the man wasn't married to the woman. The problem was that the woman was married to another man. And I'm emphasizing this because when we're looking at these passages, we need to understand that we're talking about property rights. Not entirely exclusively, but this is what is explicitly said. This has to do with financial value. This has to do with, remember that word Baal, the one who owns the other person. A woman did not own her sexuality in that culture. Her sexuality belonged first to her father and then to her husband. She did not own her body. It belonged to her father and then to her husband. And so this right here, it seems a little bit strange to me that the implication anyway of 22:22 is that this is a consensual lying together, that they're both conspiring to cheat on this guy. And this was not allowed. This was punished with the death penalty again. In this case, the man gets the death penalty as well. Interesting. If there's a betrothed virgin, what betrothal was basically a man saying, I am going to buy you. I think he had already delivered the money to her father, but had not welcomed the woman into his home. He had not gone into her at this point. If there's a betrothed virgin and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, they meet in the city, they lie together, most likely having sex. Then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city and you shall stone them to death. For different reasons. The woman, because she did not cry for help. Because she was not supposed to have sex with anybody besides the person she was betrothed to. The man was to be stoned. Why? Because he did something to a woman? No. Because he did something to the property of his neighbor. And I don't like this any more than potentially you do, this treatment of women as property. But I keep on emphasizing it because this is what is going on here. This is the language of these teachings in the Torah about sexuality. He gets killed because he stole his neighbor's stuff. In this case, his neighbor's rights to sex with this woman. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and notice, both of these are stages of being betrothed, two separate instances. Here's in the city, here's in the country. The man seizes her. In this case, the man meets her. In this case, the man seizes her. Can we kind of like picture the difference between these two things? Finds her, masa. I think this is the one that says to meets her. If a man finds her, this is matzah, find, present, find out, to meet. Okay. And then we're going to contrast with the word seizes down here. You know, the ultimate ending is that they lie together in both cases. But in this case, the word is hazak. This is to force. Strong, repair, hold, strengthen, harden. So this is a case of rape. In the first one, it's not necessarily a case of rape. It could be consensual. If a woman is raped, then only the man who lay with her shall die. Let's remember again, the reason why he dies is not because he had sex with a woman who didn't want to have sex. The reason why he dies is because he had sex with a woman who belonged to another man. This is the issue. So if you're a woman, you are very well protected by these laws if you belong to another man. If you don't belong to a man, you are at risk. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. I mean, If I was trying to take advantage of this, I would meet anybody I wanted to have sex with out in the country. Just be like, all right, we're going to do this in a place where you'll be safe. What is this? For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor. Oh goodness. I want to wrap up because it's been an hour, but that will be something to look into. Attacking and murdering his neighbor because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. I wonder what this refers to. Like, I wish we had. Here's a cross reference to. Let's do the cross references of this one. How do we do this? I've never actually used this function here before. Rises against his neighbor and murders him, so this case. I do like the association here that's made between rape and murder. But the way that this is structured just as a sentence here suggests that it is because there was no one to witness it. And I'm not sure where to go to see about the association with murder. So that will have to be at a later time. Now we get to, this is our fourth scenario. A man meets, again, we're back to like the beginning. This doesn't look like it's rape. This is meeting, but nope, here we have seizes. A man meets and seizes. Oh, goodness. So we have both of these things. Remember the first one, the man meets, seizes. Okay. This is similar then to that second scenario. However, this virgin is not betrothed. They are found having sex or lying together, if that's different. And again, still this curiosity. If you know of an answer to this difference between lying with and going into, to uncover the nakedness of, these are all euphemisms. There's so many euphemisms in the Old Testament. You're probably reading about sex without even knowing it. So this happens. They're found. Then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver. And let's see what the commentaries have to say. I think this would have been a bride price. This would have been something of a dowry. I don't know if it would be a full dowry in this case, though. I'm just really not sure of how many shekels of value there were for these things. So let's see. Okay. Pay your dad 100 shekels of silver. So the fine for lying about the woman's virgin status was 100. So this is pretty cheap. This is kind of the way to elope if you wanted to do this, it seems. But still, you have seizing. This is a case of rape. This isn't a case of consensual sex. So it's important that we understand this. And then you see this. He shall give to the father 50 shekels. This is like an extraordinary robbery of this man. Because let's say he could sell her for 400 shekels as a virgin, but now he only gets 50. This is awful. And she shall be his wife because he has violated her. This seems like a really sad scenario. I wish I don't have access. Let me see if Google knows. How many shekels in the Mosaic law for a virgin versus non-virgin bride? Gotta love the internet. The basic ketubah was 1 manah, 50 shekels. It was double that of 200 verses. Let's see. It seems a little confusing, but let's see what it says. Right. The 50 is only for pay for any shame. Wow. Well, there's a lot more information here when we look into some of the Jewish law. Like when we read the book of Moses, this is just the starting point. It's kind of like the US Constitution and then all of the thousands of laws that have been added onto the top of it. This is part of it looks like the Midrash. All of the additional, wow, all of the additional laws and statutes. So this when the Pharisees were talking to Jesus about things like washing your hands before you eat, this was all part of this whole legal jargon. Okay. Yep. Oh, this is interesting. I think I'm going to come through and read this article afterward. There's a lot of interesting articles on these things. What I think is important to remember here is that we have specific scenarios of things and what needs to happen. Again, he may not divorce her all of her days. So if a man does injustice to a woman, he gets stuck with her. He may not divorce her. So there is encouragement for a man to not do this, to actually be betrothed and to marry instead of just having sex with random women that he finds that don't belong to other men. There is a encouragement toward marriage. And this is incredibly helpful because without a law like this, let's just say we didn't have the example of the virgin who is not betrothed. An Israelite man can get away with rape. This is the one law that says if you rape a girl, you have to take financial responsibility for the outcome of what you've done. More than that, you have to marry her. She shall belong to you. Why? Because you have violated her. Now, this logic is one that I don't understand. Maybe you have some insights into this. Because you have violated someone, humiliated. Remember, this is the same word as we saw back in chapter 21 with the man who took the bride from war. He had humiliated her and therefore could not sell her as a slave and could not sell her for money, but he could send her away. In this case, he couldn't divorce her all of his days. He was stuck with her. So it's kind of like before you have sex with somebody, see if you want to be stuck with them all of your days. We don't have an example here of a man meeting a virgin who is not betrothed and lying together. All we have is the case of rape. We don't have an example here in the law of consensual sex between two partners. We have a case of non-consensual sex and consequences that follow. So when I came in my study, I was looking for where do we have these laws about premarital sex. We have 3 examples of premarital sex. None of them apply to the question that people today, where women have agency over their bodies, over their sexuality. What can this passage tell us? This does tell us that a man has to take responsibility for his actions. This passage does tell us that adultery was a really big deal in that time. And I think for a lot of people, it still is. There is still this concept for a lot of people that a man owns a woman and her sexuality, especially if they're married. And there were laws, and the way that people feel about cheating is similar to, like, it is on scale of the death penalty that we see here. Is that saying that this is a good thing? Is that saying maybe we should bring back the death penalty for cheating? Uh, don't ever do that. But what this is recognizing is that the scale of possession that a person felt over the sexuality of the woman made it seem as though death was an appropriate consequence for the man who took sexual pleasure in a woman who belonged to someone else. It also tells us that there is financial value to virginity, at least in this cultural context. But it doesn't answer our question, does it? All of these examples don't lead us to the conclusion that premarital sex is a sin. It shows us that there is financial value involved. It shows us when there is dishonesty and deception involved. It shows us when there is rape involved. It shows us when there is ownership involved. But it doesn't answer the premarital sex question. And this is the thing that frustrated me a lot when I first began my study, because I was looking for the passage that said thou shalt not have premarital sex, and I could never find it. You have some examples here of the risks and dangers for a woman of having sex with somebody, especially when she belongs to someone else. You have Moses finally making men accountable for their sexual behavior here, especially when it's toward a woman who belongs to another man, and even when it's toward a woman who does not belong to another man. I think this verse 28 is just absolutely beautiful. This is the first time you have laws protecting a woman who does not belong to another man. Like, she does belong to her father in this case, and the connection is made, but she has legal protection. Her sexual status has legal protection. Finally, just a little add-on footnote, just in case you were wondering, a man shall not take his father's wife. This is what happened in 1 Corinthians. But why shouldn't he do it? And why isn't there a death penalty attached to this, like there is to all these other things? This is weird, you know? A man shall not take his father's wife. Why? So that he does not uncover his father's nakedness. I'll give you just a little sneak peek. Keep in mind, what does it mean to uncover your father's nakedness? It means to have sex with your father's wife. In case you were wondering what happened back here, it's not in this one, it's a couple chapters previous. In this chapter, oh, it is in 9. Unbelievable. Okay. What does it mean to do this? What does it mean to do this? There are a number of really high quality studies on this question, and some of them will explore this association. There's a suggestion that Canaan, who was the son of Ham, was actually the result of Ham looking upon his father's nakedness. Most likely in Genesis, this is the opinion that I think is most credible to me, is that Canaan was the child of Ham and his mother, or Ham and Noah's wife. Ham's uncovering of Noah's nakedness was this, taking his father's wife. This is where euphemisms crisscross and we try to seek understanding, and it's not incredibly clear, but there is an implication that Canaan was not the child of Ham and Ham's wife, it was a child of Ham and Noah's wife. So Again, what's really interesting is the reason you're not supposed to do this is because the wife is your father's nakedness. There was not, you shall not take his father's wife to expose the woman's nakedness. It was to expose the father's nakedness. And if you decide to join me for a study of that at some point, I probably won't do it this way, but Exodus, my brain's going, I think it's, Leviticus chapter 18. All about the people whose nakedness should not be uncovered. What does that euphemism mean in any case? Probably has something to do with this. And that whole list is about incestuous relationships. So again, nothing about whether it's before or after marriage. All of this has to do with betrothal. Does the woman belong to another man? And if you're curious to dive into that a little bit, we do expand on that idea of marriage and moral status being closely connected in the webinar on Thursdays. You're definitely welcome to join for one of those. We just take a look at a couple of passages where adultery comes into play. And this is the specific meaning. Adultery means having sex with a woman who belongs to another man. It's fairly straightforward. It doesn't have anything to do with the sexual status of the man. Men's sexuality did not belong to their wives, even though wives' sexuality did belong to the men. So we have this case. Now we have to ask the question, is this prescriptive? Is this patriarchal culture something that we should say when we are looking to restore biblical marriage? Are we talking about that? Are we talking about where women do not have agency over their sexuality? Are we talking about where we treat women as property? Are we talking about placing financial value on virginity? Are we talking about getting married at the age of 12? No. Like, I think we need to understand that there are thousands of years of history in between us and the days when this book was written. And not only that, we have a profound transformation that comes about because of Jesus, that changes everything about the way that we approach these relationships. If you remember back in Genesis chapter 3, you have the first phrase, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. This is what we see in this whole patriarchal context of the Mosaic law. He rules over you. This is the word baal, to rule, to own, to possess. This is a result of the fall. If Jesus came to restore the pleasure and delight of relationships that existed before the fall, when there was nakedness without shame, what does that mean? How does that change the way we think about living today? I feel so much freedom to look at these passages, and this was just an absolute delight. I'm a little sad I didn't get any company here, but want to definitely invite you to join to a future study, to ask any questions, to contact me. This is the work that I'm doing, is to unravel these passages and our understanding of them, because they implicate what we mean when we talk about things like biblical marriage and whether or not premarital sex is a sin. Where do we get this idea from? What about fornication? If you haven't already seen it, go watch that video on Pornea or any of these others. And if you have any questions that I haven't addressed somewhere yet, or that I maybe have, I would love to chat about them. This is something I thoroughly enjoy, and thanks for the excuse to come online, do this intensive Bible study. I hope it wasn't overwhelming, and hopefully you were able to learn something, maybe pick up a couple of these tools and techniques of looking at, well, what do the words actually mean? Where do they show up in these passages? What is the larger context that we're talking about? And what can we learn for today? These are such big questions, and I'm grateful you joined me for some of this. Cheers, everyone.